Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, January 27th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you in our position preview series, shifting the focus today to UT-only players because, well, there's the, Shohei Ohtani thing, the guy that goes 1-1 in a lot of drafts. He doesn't fit into the other position previews, so we have to have a UT-only. But there's other interesting bats in this group, and as a bit of a bonus, and because we took too long with some of the other outfielders, we have late outfielders tucked in to this episode as well. So tons of ground to cover, like always. We'll start getting back to some news here in about a week or so, because tomorrow, Tuesday, January 28th, is the start of Pitcher Week.
Pitcher Week. Always fun. Sorry, I won't have my my rankings out this week. I'm doing a big stuff plus story for next week, and then the rankings will come out the week after that. But you will get a pretty good look at my rankings from the way I talk about them. I don't really hold back, so you could probably piece it all together if you really took notes.
I will also try to hack Eno in between now and the start of Pitcher Week and see what I can
do enough
find.
Would you rather so you can pretty much figure it out.
Yeah, just take a piece of paper and just start scribbling things down as you go, and you'll come up with a pretty good look at the rankings and what they're going to look like once they are available. The Hive Mind rankings are still rolling. Be sure to join our Discord. There is a UT-only section, which should be much more manageable. So if you're still taking some time on the outfield, which runs 50 deep, and you're even thinking about the late outfielders from today as part of that, that is absolutely fine. But the UT will be open as well, so you can dig into that. All right, let's start with Shohei Ohtani. All right, you got the first pick. You won. You got first pick, either by KDS because you wanted it, or even if it was your third or fourth choice, that's what you drew. Is Shohei Ohtani the player you take at the top of the board this year?
I was in a draft and hold where I had the third pick recently, and I thought this would be interesting because I was bumming out because I couldn't run because I have COVID toe. It's the most ridiculous thing. Apparently, when I got COVID 2 weeks ago, I didn't even know I had COVID. It was a vascular situation in my toe. It was not actually a blister. So anyway, I was bumming that I couldn't run, so I joined another DC. How do you solve being bummed out? You start drafting again.
Draft. Throw money at the problem and draft. Yeah.
And I had the third pick, and I was actually worried that Ohtani would get to me at third, and I was reaching around trying to figure out who else I could pick because it was a draft and hold. And what I really don't like about utils in draft and holds is I'm always trying to make sure I have 4 eligibilities for every position. I'm trying to get cross-positional guys. I'm trying to just make sure that over the course of the season, I can cover every position. And taking a util-only guy always puts you behind on that. Like in the league where I have Brent Rooker, I also had the hardest time getting enough players together at every position. And it cost me basically a pitcher or two at the end because I had a guy who's just util. It didn't help me anywhere. So, and the other thing is I took Gunnar Henderson third over Aaron Judge.
All right.
I did it. Yeah, I said I might on this show. And then I means tested it and it felt so good. And just as an aside, the reason I did it is because I have a question or two about Aaron Judge. Maybe it's the same question, right? Age, injury, right? Maybe it's just one question. I have no questions about Gunnar Henderson. Zero.
Am I supposed to fight you about Aaron Judge on the UT-only preview? Is that supposed to happen?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, So take Ohtani. It's fine. I love Ohtani in daily leagues where he's one guy and you can switch him between. He's by far the most valuable player in fantasy baseball if he's one player and you can play him as a pitcher and a hitter. By far.
And even in the situation you just described where you said, well, I don't really like having UT-only players and draft and holds because I like players with multiple eligibilities. Guess what? His other eligibility is pitcher, and he's going to pitch again this year. And the situation with the depth they have there is ideal. They can give him the extra rest that they want to give him, push him to 120, 130 innings, whatever that number is. It's a built-in toggle to a top 10 sort of pitcher.
Would you ever pick one start of Ohtani over 5 or 6 days of hitting?
Yeah, because I think what can happen in a DC, and anyone who's played in draft and hold leagues where you've lost a ton of pitchers, is the value of having one really good start could be huge for the standings. Just the option. It may only be a handful of times, but I think the chaos that can reign on a team where you can't make pickups especially makes Ohtani uniquely useful in that scenario. And it's plenty valuable even in leagues where you can make moves. We've talked about the difficulty in deeper leagues, 15-team leagues, of streaming pitching, trying to find guys in the waiver wire, trying to play the matchups, trying to pick up 2-start pitchers. In the highly competitive leagues like the NFBC, it's a tough road to get high-quality pitching week in and week out off of the waiver wire, because a lot of folks are looking at the same things and looking at the same matchups and targeting the same players, and it turns into this really challenging fab sort of management game. So I think the versatility of Ohtani continues to be a little bit underrated by a lot of folks, even in leagues where you have to make a choice. And I got an email from CBS Fantasy because they've added a commissioner function where you can choose how Ohtani gets used up in your league, which, if you're in a keeper league or a dynasty league, creates a bit of a problem. I don't think you can change how Ohtani is used in a league where he's already kept. Yeah. So you'd have to do it at a point where he's available to the entire league. Put it to a vote or just have the commissioner decide, or whatever your league likes to do. But I think if you've had him as a player that could be used a certain way for the entire time that he's been here, I don't think you can just flip the switch for him as an already kept player and have that be fair. So you got to be mindful of that. But in daily leagues where you have to choose, he gets added value there, right? In some leagues where you get all the stats all the time, he's an easy runaway 1-1 sort of player. But even if you were just saying you only get the hitting stats, Ohtani at 1-1 is at least an option, even if we're not saying it's a lock, right? He's doing enough as a hitter to still be in that conversation, even without any value as a pitcher.
Yeah, the only thing I worry about is a shoulder surgery going into the season. Maybe he makes it back and gets his full plate appearances, but I think he's over-projected plate appearance-wise, because the years where he did pitch, he took days off from hitting. And I think it did cost him, because basically if you had 6 days of hitting in a week and one day he's pitching and one day he's taking off, that might be 4 days of hitting in the week plus the 1 day pitching. And we're not exactly sure how they're going to use him or what they're going to do with that or if he's going to rest. But I do think there's a little bit of nervousness, for me at least, of like maybe my over-under for stolen bases for him is more like 28. Maybe my over-under for plate appearances for him next year is more like 605, 620 instead of 690 for Steamer, 665, So there's I said he's the most valuable, but there are situations where he loses value, like when he's in a weekly league or you have to choose between hitter and pitcher and stuff like that. So and then there's this asterisk of how healthy is his shoulder, and even how much is he going to pitch. I think my over-under on innings pitched right now is like 105.
For context, before this injury, it's his non-pitching shoulder. He's coming back from the labrum tear in 2021, 130 and a third innings. In 2022, 166. 2023, 132 even. So that gives you the idea of like the upper bounds of what he could do, knowing that they are planning on another deep playoff run, trying to make sure they don't push him too hard. They could be under those numbers. That's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, if you want 30 playoff innings or whatever, 20 playoff innings, then you can only get like 110 regular season innings.
But the only other thing to talk about with Ohtani is the health of that shoulder, right? I mean, is he going to have the same power right away? Because we've seen the seasons where the plate appearances are down because he's pitching and needs a little bit of rest, and he could still hit 40 homers in that capacity. You can dial the playing time down the way you described, and he could still hit 40 homers. You could scale the stolen bases back, and he was stealing 20-plus bags in those 40 home run seasons. And he was doing it while hitting for a high average and getting on base a ton. So you can dial him back, and he's still that good. The only thing I'd be worried about is if the shoulder is giving him problems throughout the first half of the season even, maybe the power just takes a little bit more time to come all the way back. I know I've said never doubt Shohei Ohtani.
Sitting him, and like, what if he just doesn't, what if he's behind in spring and they're just like, yeah, he's, the first 3 weeks he's not going to play.
Yeah, like those are the concerns that I've got kind of built in. Is like maybe the power's not there right away, and we're getting 70% of the power that we're accustomed to, and then reducing the playing time and taking away steals.
He'll still be like, what are we talking about? Even if he like has 605 plate appearances, hits 40 homers, hits 280 with 25 stolen bases, like he could still be in the conversation for the best fantasy hitter in baseball.
Right. That's why, despite the risk, people are still doing what they're doing, taking them where they are. Right. So it's not without risk because of that injury, especially. But we've seen him do such ridiculous things in this dual role that even just getting back to pitching in early April and providing a lot of that value still as a hitter at the usual rates of playing time would put him right there at the top of the board. He's not the only interesting UT-only player as far as early rounders go. You drop down to that pick 75 range, and you find a trio of big-time power bats that do not have eligibility anywhere. Choose between Marcell Ozuna, Brent Rooker, and Kyle Schwarber. Let's assume 5x5 with average instead of OBP. Who do you like the most of that trio? Because they are lumped together by ADP right now, and I think their projections come out very similarly, which is why that keeps happening.
I'm going to take Rooker. I'm a little bit nervous about Ozuna's sort of up and down career with regards to power and his age. Just to confirm that I know what his age is. 34, yes. I'm concerned about 34-year-olds. Rooker, age-wise, is in a good spot. And then, if you look across, what they do, Kyle Schwarber is projected to probably be the best player of the bunch, but they're all super close. And the one thing that Schwarber has that the other guys don't have is like big minuses in certain categories. So I think that ATC had like a way to talk about this, about the balance of your category, like your categorical balance as a player, and you tend to want to get balanced categorical players because they're easier to replace. If you put all your stolen bases into one player and you lose him, it's not very easy to go into the wire and get like a 60 or 70 stolen base guy. So in a similar way, Schwarber is so good at the power aspect, but it's so negative at the batting average thing that he forces you to do certain things categorically. So I just love, I think Rooker's going to have a decent batting average. I think all the power is going to be there. There's the upside of his park. They're all a little bit older, but Rooker is on the younger side of this trio. So I'll take Rooker. I did want to say that I changed the settings on the auction calculator away from the NFC settings just for this one, because I wanted to see what it'd be like for people in one catcher leagues with 2 utility spots. So I ran the auction calculator for 1 catcher, full suite of infield, 5 outfielders, 1 middle, 1 center, 1 corner infield, and 2 utility spots for 15 teams. And Schwarber, 33rd best hitter. Brent Rooker, 38th best hitter. Marcell Ozuna, 37th best hitter. All basically $20 to $22 players. They're right there, according to Oopsie, with Manny Machado, Freddie Freeman, Anthony Santander, William Contreras, and then in a 1-catcher league, Willie Adames. So Ketel Marte's right in the middle of this. So I would say that this trio is extremely undervalued in most settings.
Yeah, I think even if you don't play in that kind of league, and most leagues are either 2-catcher or even 1-catcher with 1 utility, clogging the utility spot is one of the things people say that I just don't agree with it. I don't worry about it.
I think it matters in draft and hold, because draft and hold, you need to cover everything.
Yeah,
but I think once you get out of draft and hold,
hitter.
Yeah, that's true.
You're collecting surplus value as opposed to I didn't clog the utility and now I'm putting in the best available hitter off my team that's either the third corner infielder, or like first, third corner. Like the depth
that was
player
really
you're
kind
putting
of a
in
backup or whatever. It's my sixth outfielder. How good is your sixth outfielder going to be, really?
Right. And I think what you have to do to counteract using any of the early utility players is just make sure you have some multi-position eligible players elsewhere on your roster to give yourself the flexibility of getting the best available bench guy in. There's other ways to do it, right? That's it. And if you didn't do it, I still don't think it would ruin your team. I just think you'd have some weeks where you have to slightly more difficult decisions, or you don't have the choice because the pieces only fit a certain way. I think that's what you have to be mindful of if you're going to take any one of the early UTs that are going to stick on your roster all season. I don't know, of the three, I think 5 games in season is what it takes to qualify at a position in many leagues. So it's not really that much. You think Rooker might qualify first based on...
That's my guess. They've talked about him playing in the outfield. And the way they've talked about it is a little bit different. So Masataka Yoshida is going to be in our next tier for UT only. And I looked at it because I thought they said, they're going to play him in the outfield, right? That's how I read it. And then I went and found the quote, and it was more, it'd be great for us if he could play the outfield.
What? But really, would that be great for you? It means some other stuff kind of didn't work out the way you'd hoped. I don't know. I feel like that's just something you say in the winter because you want to be as optimistic about everyone being able to do anything you need them to do without talking about.
And you might also be in contract negotiations with a free agent or whatever, there's all sorts of reasons you say things.
Yeah.
But let me see here. Mark Kotze on Rooker playing outfield, because I didn't actually check his. I thought it was he's going to play the outfield some. With Rook, it definitely is an option for us to utilize him in the outfield next year. It's an option for us. Crap, that's not good.
Yeah, well, that's more sober analysis. I mean, we know he had surgery at the end of the season, though, too. So that's a.
They were saying that his arm was a problem for him playing the outfield, and now that he's got his arm fixed, it's more likely that he can play the outfield.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Schwarber got to 5 games in the outfield. If you finished with 5, I mean, unless they were clustered around someone being on the IL.
Did he get him last year? When did he get his 5th outfield?
That's what I was trying to. I was trying to go back through the game logs and look and see how long that actually took for him to get those opportunities. I don't know.
The other part for Rooker is just that the left field. We've talked about this before, but the left field situation in Oakland is terrible.
That's true.
So they have a real obvious. Oh no! You said he only did 5 in the outfield.
Yeah, it was only 5 to take to the end of the year.
The 5th one was September 4th.
Yeah, I mean, so you waited until
September 8th. So you got 2 weeks of him in the outfield.
So you can't bank on that being a thing that is very likely to happen with Schwarber. It's more likely with Schwarber than Ozuna, even with their decision to trade Jorge Soler away because they brought in Profar, right? Yeah. So once Acuna comes back, they're going to be really crowded in the outfield. Kelnick's the 4th outfielder, so Marcell Ozuna won't qualify anywhere, barring.
I think Rooker could maybe do it in the first month. I mean,
yeah. So maybe that's separator too. The other differences between these players: Schwarber, probably the most batting average downside, but safest power floor of the group by far, and the run and RBI counts are phenomenal year over year over year. You might get a 0 or a near 0 in the stolen base department, whereas Rooker will give you a little bit there. Ozuna might hit for a higher average, but you mentioned being older, up and down production throughout his career. Yeah, I think of the group, I do like Rooker and Schwarber the most. I'm much more likely to roster one of those guys than I am to even think about rostering Marcell Ozuna, even though the price is equal across the board here.
We were talking about shoulders at some point, and we decided that hurting one was better than the other. What was the Tatis? Is that the front shoulder or the back shoulder?
You want me to remember Tatis's shoulder injury? Which shoulder it was?
Or Bellinger's
shoulder?
Yeah.
Bellinger, I thought it was right, swings left hand. I think it was his front shoulder. It's my first guess.
Yeah. And we were talking about how it's really hard to let go all the way, to take the full swing. Yeah, Conforto was the front shoulder, and he said I couldn't take my full swings. I was doing two-handed swing throughs and stuff because I was worried about popping it out again. Anyway, Masataka Yoshida had shoulder surgery, and he had it on his right shoulder, which is his front shoulder. And it was labral repair, October 3rd. No further details, but they said that he should be ready for opening day. And and I'm kind of two minds. It's a little bit different than with Ohtani, because with Yoshida, he was dealing with it all year, right? It wasn't like he hurt himself like Ohtani hurt himself in front of us. We saw it happen. We saw how bad he looked afterwards, and he didn't look good again after he did that. And he was kind of like, kind of holding it. Remember one time he ran off the field holding it?
Yeah,
holding his shoulder after in a bat. Yeah, so with Yoshida, it's a little bit different. I think maybe it's some sort of wear or something. Some sort of, getting worse over time. I'm just really surprised that Yoshida last year made some gains in terms of lifting the ball better and still hit the ball decently hard, and, did some things better than he did in 2023, Yoshida did. And he did this all hurt. And, Oopsie doesn't like him as much as the others, but all of them project him to be 10% better than league average with the bat. And yes, he's definitely both a DH only and in a platoon. So he's comfortably behind this group, but there are times when Yoshida falls too far. I mean, this is a guy who might be able to hit 280 with 18 homers and 5 stolen bases for you.
Yeah, I think the playing time is generally pretty safe for Yoshida overall. I mean, once he's fully recovered from the shoulder injury.
I mean, he's not going to get more than 600 plate appearances.
Right. There's a pair of DHs that kind of go before the late UT only guys. So let's look at Stanton and Pederson. So Giancarlo Stanton versus Jock Pederson. They go outside the top 300 overall. So in 15-team leagues, they're still getting drafted. In 12s, they're still probably getting drafted there too, as late bench options for those chasing power. And I guess we've talked about Pederson probably as part of the platoon conversation we had in the outfield, even though he's a DH. We said, okay, he's got this clearly maximized role that's worked really well for him in recent years, right? Jock Pederson hasn't reached 500 plate appearances in a season since 2019. Really consistent. And that's with 4 different organizations in 4 years, a 481, a 433, a 425, and a 444. He could still get to low 20s home run power. He could still steal a few bags, not a lot. And then you're looking at probably 60-ish runs and 60 or so RBIs. That is okay, but it's really like situational in usage because of how strictly he gets platooned. The weeks where
he doesn't even finish the game. So it's not only, he doesn't play every game. It's like he won't even get the last plate appearance in a game.
Right. And we talked about it. I think it was comparing him to Kerry Carpenter and knowing how Carpenter can be flipped out of the game as well, even though he does really, really well in that big side platoon split. So do you see a weekly league use case at all for Jock or even for Stanton? I mean, with Stanton, it's more of just the staying healthy question too. Like, I think you can look at him and say, wow, he still hits the ball really hard. The raw power is still there. Much like Jock, playing time now the last 3 years, 450, 415, 459. Did get to 579 back in 2021. So he's got 1 year in the last 4 where that playing time was at a level that Jock seemingly can't get to. It's coming with a little more batting average downside because of the types of non-missiles that Stanton occasionally hits and his waning speed. So he's just a really odd player. I don't really
like either of these guys in weekly leagues at all, really. And even in daily leagues, you can make the case, I think, easier for Jock Pederson in daily leagues because lefty versus righty, that happens more often. Mm-hmm. And I can put him in against righties, and it's very easy to know when to play him. Even in those situations, like I said, he's going to lose a plate appearance at the end of the game, so he doesn't have that same upside as even a Kerry Carpenter because, Kerry Carpenter's younger and could figure something out, and the team could just decide to do something different. Whereas Jock, this is who he is, and he gets taken out if a lefty reliever comes in. Plus with Jock, a little bit of declining bat speed, and he's really up to 50% pull. So I don't know if you've watched him, but all he does is that front foot hip just flies open, and all he's trying to do is hit the ball like hard down the line in the air, and I just feel like that becomes more pitchable too over time. Like, it just becomes really obvious what he's trying to do, and it's doesn't mean that he can continue to do it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And at 32, I'm starting to worry, like, any more decline in bat speed, and I think he becomes, more like a 230 hitter who hits 20 homers, and that's super boring. So I'm generally readjusting my worriness about age. I feel like the game right now requires you to be young and athletic in a lot of different reasons. The shift bands, the velo being up, all sorts of things. We're seeing younger and younger players in the league. And so, generally I'm out on these two players.
I think my first exception would probably be like AL only leagues. There might be a little extra value here because the power is still legit for both, but they carry plenty of batting average risk despite the quality of the contact, because within that is lost potential on balls in play. They're just going to hit a lot of fly balls that turn into easy outs. So you got to bake that in. And again, neither of these guys run particularly well at this stage of their respective
and Jock
careers.
like rolls over a lot of them on the ground too. So it's like I don't know. Their approach, Stanton's approach is better, but he's just capped not by platoon issues, but just by his body. Right. Yeah, and I think that one's actually a little bit harder because at least with the platoon issue, you'd be like, oh, righty I play him. With Stanton, it's like, do I hold on to him through this injury? Is this like a 6-week hammy or is this like an 8-week hammy? Like, is it worth holding on to? So I don't know. Mostly out on these two guys.
Mono league goodness. That's where I fall for Stanton and Pederson. It works there. It doesn't necessarily work for a lot of the mixed leagues that we play in. Let's get to the late UT only players and maybe look for a few that could have paths to qualify somewhere else. What happens is a lot of guys don't play enough to qualify anywhere, and therefore they end up as UT only players. So let's see what we can do. We've got old friend Kyle Manzardo is in this group, and maybe his path to first base eligibility got a little more complicated when they traded Josh Naylor and immediately signed Carlos Santana. So
yeah, but Carlos Santana's old as dirt, dude. Like, it's not going to work 1 year, And if Manzardo starts hitting well, like if Manzardo has a great spring, like he'll play first base.
You think he could take it over? He played 6 games at the major league level at first last year, had 40 as the DH just by comparison. So compared to the DHs we were talking about earlier, the Rooker, Schwarber group, I would say Manzardo qualifying at first is more in the direction of Rooker qualifying in the outfield, where it might not happen right away, but it shouldn't take forever to come together either. If he's hitting enough, he'll stay in the lineup and be very productive. So the second question, though, is how much do you think Manzardo hits this year, right? It was 53 games in the big leagues last year with Cleveland, 26% K rate, walk rate just under 6%. Do you think the adjustments are taking place that are going to make him a regular in a Cleveland lineup that continues to look for some answers?
I think they need hitters, and he has enough upside. We'll talk about this with Giancarlo Noel, but Giancarlo Noel, has better bat speed, better top end exit velos, and obvious flaw in strikeout rate. Manzardo has the chance to be kind of a maybe even a Naylor-esque hitter, right? Decent batting average, probably better plate approach than Naylor, maybe slightly less raw power. So I think that they keep giving him chances because he's their type of player too. Noel is not really necessarily their type of player. They haven't gone with that since Franmil Reyes in a long time. So I would say he'll get chances, and I'm a little surprised he's projected so well. Manzardo's projected to be either 7 or 17% better than league average with the bat. With like a 200 ISO. Oopsie says a 179 ISO, probably because of some of that top end bat speed that's not quite there. But I will mention that Manzardo hit a ball 109.8 in the major leagues last year. In the minor leagues, he hit a ball 111.9 in 2023 and 111.6 last year. So there's might be a little bit of just getting the lay of the land. Maybe he's not doing his A swing every time because he's trying to make contact and trying to, show that he belongs. But maybe as he gets more comfortable, he takes some bigger swings and we see more of that top end power. Either way, it's a pretty finished player. You know what I mean? In terms of, it's a good approach at the plate. This is a guy that should work out. I don't know why. If it doesn't, I'm not sure. Maybe it's not quite enough bat speed, but he's 24. it's time for him to rock.
I mean, 45.2% hard hit rate at AAA last year. It was 48.5% in 2023 during his time in the Rays organization. Post-trade it dipped, but we've seen him run really good hard hit rates with a great sense of strike zone judgment everywhere he's been. I think this is going to work. It's platoon risk too. We saw that already based on how they were mixing and matching, so you have to bake that in. But another deep league player that I like, dynasty leagues, probably cheap to get right now and could have a nice breakout.
Yeah, I like this as a dynasty buy, and also even in this year's redraft leagues, like I do like him a little better than the Jock Stanton situation, just because the uncertainty arrow is pointing the right direction.
Yeah.
He could figure it all out, and like Santana's not going to stop him, and DH is open, so. There's a lot of roads for him to succeed this year.
How about Chris Bryant? Yeah, it sounds like he'll be part of the DH right field rotation. And I saw an article from Thomas
you ended
Harding.
Up with him in Devil's Rejects.
Well, it's a dispersal draft where you just take everybody and see what happens later. It doesn't mean he's on my team after cuts.
That's right.
But
that's true.
Thomas Harding had a story about him this offseason, and Bryant's been adhering to a program to strengthen his long, troublesome back. All checkups rendered a thumbs up. So if that holds true through spring training and lengthy regular season, maybe we get 115 or 120 games from Chris Bryant. That's not why I took him in the dispersal draft. The options at the time were uninspiring. The alternatives were not good either. But, Chris Bryant with health, there's always this possibility he could be, I don't want to say a Stantonian sort of player, because no one really hits the ball as hard as Giancarlo Stanton has in his career, other than maybe Aaron Judge and now peak Shohei Ohtani.
And Bryant never really did.
And Bryant never hit the ball quite that hard, but a version of Chris Bryant in his early 30s being useful in Colorado isn't the most ridiculous thing I've ever thought about. I just don't know. It's kind of like an NL only endgame sort of play. I don't know if I'm really that excited about him, because I do think before it was the back, it was the shoulder in Chicago, right? So he's had some major injuries that have hampered him for the better part of about 4 years now. And I don't know. I don't know if we're ever going to see even like the 265, 353, 481. That was 2021, the year that he split between the Cubs and the Giants. That seems like it's pretty out of reach for him at this stage of his career.
Yeah, and what would he be closest to adding? Maybe outfield eligibility in 2024. He had 12 games in the outfield and 10 at first. So, one of those two would be the first he added. I kind of like him better as like a third or fourth first baseman in draft and hold, where if he does put it together, and because first base is actually a really difficult position in draft and hold, you're hoping you get a third or fourth first baseman out of him that you can play when he's in Colorado. So.
Yeah, maybe there's a world where Tolia plays his way out of that role and Brian ended up getting a little more time at first. That could be nice.
Tolia with that strikeout rate we've been talking about. In Boston, I do want to point out that I don't know if Arenado's going to get there, and Arenado seems like a better fit for the Yankees anyway. But there was some smoke around this, and if Arenado does end up there, then Yoshida does have to play in the outfield some. And when he does, he'll have to play next to Duran.
A whole conversation about this.
That wasn't. I didn't do that on purpose. That was actually an apology. It didn't sound like it. It was an apology for getting his last name wrong. It's just when I start with Jaron, I go Duran. So I'm just gonna in my head call him Duran from now on, and nobody else has to.
Just gonna
come with me on that journey.
Miss on the other direction. Miss on the first.
But I do think that Yoshida could actually add outfield. I would rank him third behind Rooker and Manzardo in likely adding an extra aspect.
I feel like the rest of this position is an exercise in wish casting. Eloy Jiménez has an invite.
He has to get a job first.
Right, has to earn a spot on the Rays roster, which I don't think is impossible, but I don't really see an in-season path for him to qualify as an outfielder anymore. He played one game in the outfield after being with the White Sox and Orioles last year. It seems like maybe his days playing defense are pretty much over in the big leagues. Do you think the bat still has something there where we could get excited about Jiménez, though, as a very, very inexpensive dart that comes in and I don't know, maybe hits for a decent average and pops 20 homers in 500 plate appearances.
I do. I still like certain things about him in terms of he swings the bat decently hard, and he, good barrel rates are not that far in his rear view. 2022, he had a 14.7% barrel rate with a 22% strikeout rate. So, like, I would give a person like this a chance on my team for sure. The one thing I worry about with the Rays is just, if you have Chris Morel in the outfield, you're starting to hurt your defense a little bit. And then if you want to have Jonathan Aranda, Yandy Diaz, and Christopher Morel on your team with Eloy Jiménez, I think you start getting into some uncomfortable lineups defensively, right?
That is a possibility. Yes. I wonder if Morel can be good enough in left field to make that less of a concern. Is that much of an ask? Trying to get him to play in the infield seems like a bigger stretch than making him a passable corner outfielder.
So what's your three-way usage pattern for Aranda, Diaz, and Eloy Jiménez at DH and first?
I mean,
Aranda's the lefty.
Aranda would be a big side platoon guy, which means Yandy Diaz is either playing somewhere else or not playing. That seems kind of unlike the Rays.
No, I think
it still feels like a trade situation.
Yandy's the starter at first. Aranda is the big side DH, and Eloy cleans up little side DH. And that's what they do first
when everybody's healthy. And then it depends on if Aranda is hitting enough. I don't know how much longer are they going to run the Jonathan Aranda experiment at the big league level? Like, it's been in so many random spurts to this point. 3 different seasons in the big leagues, 333 plate appearances. Like, I just, that's not enough of a fair shake.
Yeah, I don't get it. It's really hard to read the process numbers in here and really give him a lot of shrift. Like, I don't want to report his barrel rate really. What I see is someone who can make a fair amount of contact, and the question is how much power he has, because he doesn't lift the ball. And so, can he be a Yandy light? Maybe.
I mean, I think that's what you might see from a contact quality perspective from Eloy, is that he hits the ball very hard. He hits it on the ground a lot. That's a Yandy Diaz problem. He gets on base a little less than Yandy Diaz because he doesn't walk quite as much, but low K rate, hard contact guy that hasn't put all of the best things he could do together over a full season yet. I mean, other than the debut, 2019, it's the closest thing to it. 504 plate appearances that year. That's the high water mark for Eloy Jiménez. And over the course of his time in the big leagues, he's kind of whittled away at the K rate, kept making hard contact, and had just a brutal time staying on the field.
Yeah, I think his over-under on plate appearances is like 300 or something.
But if he doesn't make this roster, he's going to get picked up by somebody again. I just can't imagine it.
The White Sox could use some help.
They could do the funniest thing. No.
Although the Marlins would probably be all over that.
Marlins, and the moving truck doesn't have to drive as far. So I think consider that. Every mile counts. I've learned that. How about Tyler Black as a UT only player? A guy that just doesn't seem like he has a position. We love him on paper. I mean, there's so many things he can do.
If he played, I think he would get a position pretty quickly. It's not because I think that Milwaukee is more a place where we don't have a full-time DH, and we also have Christian Yelich coming off of back surgery, and we'd like to keep that open for him. You know what I mean? So I think the real question is, can he play, and can he play enough first base?
I think he'd play some first base, and Rhys Hoskins would DH on those days. So those are days where Yelich is either hurt or Yelich is in the outfield. Mm-hmm. Defensively, that's the bar. Like if you're going, if Jake Bauers doesn't make the roster again, Black being a better defensive first baseman than Rhys Hoskins is one way he could edge out some playing time. There's so many things he does that are interesting from a fantasy perspective. I mean, in OBP leagues, he gets a boost, but I don't think he's bad in batting average. Strike zone judgment seems great. Definitely seemed like a player that had some trouble making the adjustment between the AAA zone and the big leagues, and only had 18 games, all kind of scattered around too, to try and figure out the adjustments.
And may have some things in common with maybe more like Frelick than than at first it seemed. Like, does not hit the ball hard.
But he gets to the raw power more than Frelick has. Like, I think there's more evidence there.
Or is he running to some of that? I mean, he's got elite speed.
Yeah, we were still excited because coming off of last season, he was 55 of 67 on the base paths in the minors. I mean, it's just amazing for the upper levels.
He calmed that down a lot this last season.
But he also, so I don't know if anybody remembers this anywhere in the world, but I was watching after Tyler Black got demoted. I was watching Nashville because I'm a sicko. So there was one night I'm like, what's Tyler Black up to? I turn on the MILB TV and I watch it, and it's right after a demotion, and he just smashes a foul ball off his own ankle. Like it's like the first day or second day after he gets demoted. I'm like, well, that's not great. And it was, like it happens a lot. Guys do this stuff all the time. But it's the kind of injury that if you are on the bubble of getting to the big leagues again, you're going to play through whatever soreness you have there if you can, right? I think it was one of those situations that may have slowed down that running a little bit and may have caused those numbers at the plate to dip a little bit compared to what we saw in his first run. It was also the first run at Nashville was 39 games. This was 102 games. So, maybe you kind of mush those together and you get a better sense of what he can do. But he's still 20 for 23 this year at AAA, 3 for 3 in the big leagues. He's going to run, and he has non-zero power. I kind of like Tyler Black because even if he's not going to play third base or even second base, I actually see enough chances at first to maybe have him work his way in there.
We also have this from Lindor that, once you get a taste of the big league, sometimes going back, you're just not into it.
That could happen too. I have no idea if that was the case with Tyler Black, but I distinctly remember the foul ball off the ankle, just adding insult to injury right off of the demotion. Late UT only options. Andrew McCutchen, last run in Pittsburgh. Sure, I mean, they're going to use him because they sort of have to, but I don't think outside of mono leagues, I'm all that excited. I don't think he's going to qualify in the outfield. I think he's just clearly a DH at this stage of his career. JD Martinez still needs a team at the time of this recording, right? Still a free agent. And then some absolute darts like Matt Mervis and Andres Chaparro. Is Mervis going to make the opening day roster?
I don't think so. I think they're going to let Jonah Bride try at it again. I was a little surprised by some of the quality of the contact from Jonah Bride, who always had a really good approach. And so I think they're going to let that play out for a little bit. And Mervis has an option, if I am correct. And that's one thing that I think you really need to look. He has one more option left. And I think you look at that when you're trying to do opening day, situations. Like, for example, in Washington, you've got Jose Tena with one option. Brady House is in the minors. Ahmed Rosario does not have options. He's on a major league deal. And Yepes, who has one option, and Chaparro, who has 3 options. And so you got to keep that in mind when you are trying to figure out what they're going to do, because teams will, especially rebuilding teams, would rather option a guy who is probably the guy they should have gone with. The way I think of this is often, I think they did this with Luke Raley. And somebody before Luke Raley, we were all like, Nate Lowe should start at first base for the Rays, and instead they optioned Nate Lowe and had who was the Korean guy they had for a long time?
Oh yes,
why can't I think of his name?
G-Man Choi.
I don't know if it was G-Man Choi, but they've done this plenty of times where you're trying to figure out what they're going to do, and the guy with an option was sent down, the guy without an option that they really wanted to get a look at, they kept to the major leagues. I think that's how Luke Raley ended up with the job, and they've done this before. So because they think, either he's good and now we have an everyday player, or we sell him and we still got the guy we optioned. So I don't think Chaparro will break camp with Washington, and he'll have to fight his way back. Is the short version of that.
I just wish Ron Howard could call in and just say it was G-Man Choi. Because that would just add so much with just a few words. That's all we really need. But yeah, that's the late cast at the UT only spot. Not a ton to get excited about there. Maybe guys that come back around at some point once we get to the team previews here in a couple of weeks.
JD Martinez had a job that we were interested in. We just, without a depth chart to kind of play around with, it's hard to know where he's going to go.
On a good team, would he end up in the Jock Pederson, Giancarlo Stanton conversation?
I guess, but he's a righty, so as he declines, you question whether or not what kind of a role he has. He could actually end up in a small side platoon role, although that would be a very good team that would want to sign somebody for a small side platoon role.
Right. So his other option would be to sign on a bad team to play every day to then get traded into the small side role for the postseason to go on a playoff run.
Yeah, which is not great.
Which is not going to be good for the counting stats, even if the playing time gets a boost. So I think it'd be a little bit like the Stanton situation with a little less power because, look, last year, JD Martinez slugged .406, and he's doing that with a high K rate, so power looks like it is waning pretty good for JD as he enters his age 37 season. We'll see if he gets another shot. Let's get to the bonus content, the late outfielders, the outfielders we like beyond pick 300. Spoiler alert, we are not talking about everybody who goes there because that list is about 3 pages long of outfielders that actually go outside the top 300 overall.
I love it though, dude. This is like one of my favorite things about fantasy because we all have 5 outfielders. Yeah, we all have 5 outfielders. We all need some help with our 5th outfielder. We all need a 6th outfielder, no matter what depth we're in. And there's there's so many different ways to mine this outfield. I'm gonna try to give you 3 of the ways that I look at outfielders, deep outfielders, to try and find people that might play more because we're always talking about playing time. And so the 3 ways that I can say real quickly before we get to them to the players is look at platoon risk, look at their glove because center fielders play more. And elite gloves will find their way on the field more often, and look at their quality of contact. So it's not anything that surprises anybody, but you may be surprised by some of the comps and some of the players that rise to the top if you look at outfield through those lenses.
I feel like I have a rare amount of power in this moment to choose which of those 3 groups to dig into first. We've talked a lot about defense. Let's start with the defense. Dalton Varsho is still a very, very good defender.
In some places he's going as a 6th outfielder.
Yeah. Led the league in fielding run value by StatCast last year. Plus 17. It's phenomenal, right? It's great to see that. I mean, the company, Pete Crow Armstrong, Jacob Young, who also goes outside the top 300, Brenton Doyle, who back-to-back Gold Glove winners and had that Fielding Bible Best Center Fielder award that he just won. So that is great company to be in. That continues to carry playing time, even if your bat leaves something to be desired. Now, the Dalton Varsho word cloud, sizable, above average, I would say, in terms of the amount of attention he has drawn over the course of Rates and Barrels history. There's still some power. 18 homers last year, stole 10 bases. Batting average risk is baked in pretty good. We have a 4-year slide from that 246 that he topped out at with Arizona down to 235, down to 220 his first year with the Jays, down to 214 last year. And it's the approach, right? It's the type of batted balls that he hits, despite being a guy that runs well and despite being a guy that until last year kept the K rate under 25% for his big league career. Even for his career, he's still a shade under there. He just hits a lot of soft fly balls that turn into outs. And that's not really going to go away because that seems like the only way that he's going to get to that much power.
Yeah. But it's okay. I mean, we have a group chat where someone paired him with Luis Arias, and you kind of pair those two, and you kind of come out with 2 guys that hit 260 with 14 homers and 13 stolen bases. You're a little power light, but you've actually stayed you've stayed on close to average in every other category. So there's way to prepare yourself for a Dalton Varsho later, and I think he's actually a great 6th outfielder, in daily leagues where you can avoid some of the lefty matchups, and where you just plug him in for extra homers and stolen bases. And then in mono leagues, this list is going to provide you some really good, surprising plate appearance totals, I think. Jacob Young is an elite center fielder. Yeah, there are other guys and whatever, but I think that there's going to go with Young in the center because if you have an elite center fielder, then you're not putting pressure on Cruz and Wood to be great defensively. And maybe Cruz is really good defensively. Maybe he could play center. Maybe if they get better, in the future, Jacob Young slides to a fourth outfielder. But I think this iteration, he plays most of the year as their center fielder. Brent Doyle, we talked about how the glove is a big part of it. Siri is, in a platoon, but this is why he got taken there. And then the next names, two of the next names are some of my favorite fifth and sixth outfielders in draft and holds. Michael Ciani and Jake Myers. There's nothing really exciting about them as hitters, and I don't really want to go through their offensive profiles because it's really blah, and not in a good oatmeal way either. It's just you're like, oh, you got a good glove. That's what you can tell when you look at their offensive lines. But I do think both of their teams Jake Myers a little bit more so than Michael Ciani because that's a competitive team, and I don't see another center fielder on that roster unless Jacob Melton makes the team. And so I think Jake Myers is pretty safe for all the playing time he wants. But I think the Cardinals, Michael Ciani, like Victor Scott didn't play that well. If he doesn't play that well in the spring, there's an easy answer for them is just to plug Michael Ciani in as the center fielder all year. So I have some places where I picked up Michael Ciani based on his glove. And I know it doesn't count in fantasy, but it matters some.
I know you're going to say not to bring up the offensive profile, but I'm going to do it anyway. I know Ciani had 22% hard hit rate last year, 2.3% barrel rate. That doesn't point to power.
That's bad.
It's 334 plate appearances for a guy in the big leagues, basically for the first time. I know he debuted in 23, but we're talking about 8 games with 6 plate appearances. That's a cup of coffee. This was actually an opportunity. He was 20 for 23 as a base stealer. I like that. Yeah. We've seen double-digit homers from him as high as AA, right? He popped 12 homers in 121 games. He's been young for the level where he's played. I think Ciani actually has things to like about him. Like the cheap speed alone is good enough. The high possible playing time volume is good too. He probably won't hit the ball
bunter
this much. Oh.
He's an elite bunter. Of course he is.
Of course. Well, you gotta do what you got to do. So it's one of those situations where you're like, oh, the WRC plus is never really that good. He was getting an average, had a 100 back in 2022, and he's been below average everywhere since. Players like this get chances. They get chances to get better because they can be well above average defenders at places that matter. So I do agree with your process here. I do think Michael Ciani could be a good, very deep league sleeper. I don't know if we're ever going to look at him and say he's more than a temporary fill-in for like a 12 or a 15 team league with in-season moves, but in draft and holds and things.
It's a specific draft and hold. It's a very specific usage. I wouldn't get too excited. If you want somebody off this list that you could maybe get excited about, a little bit more excited about their bat, I would look down at Johnny DeLuca at 16th best outfielder. That doesn't sound like it's great, but this is in center field. And so this is good defense in center field that's on par with Michael Harris and Kyle Isbell, who have jobs. And Johnny DeLuca's bat has a little bit more juice to it than Ciani's. And he's just about to maybe get full attempts in center field. I mean, the way that they're set up, I don't think there's a great lefty center fielder that's going to take the job from him. I know he's a righty, but DeLuca has the opportunity to be a full-time starter in center field for the Tampa Bay Rays.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I think they're actually, DeLuca does make a little more hard contact, but they're very similar in profile. And you go back, look at the DeLuca, look at the power he showed in the minors. It's not nothing to have that. Like the ability to either pull the fly ball or just do whatever it takes to actually unlock a little bit of power. He's shown that. The difference for me is that DeLuca did it older for the level at each of his stops. At least with Ciani, you're like, well, maybe he was younger. Maybe he's still going to get a little bigger and stronger. With DeLuca, probably a little more already finished product. But speed, probably, everyday job in center field, possibly. Yeah, I think they're very similar to me. I do probably like DeLuca a tad more because the power was a little more enticing when he was in the Dodgers system.
DeLuca's trying to pull the ball down the line like Paredes too. So maybe without great max EVs and barrels, he still manages to get to like 12, 15 homers.
Yeah. You mentioned the platoon risk. This has been a recurring part of our entire outfield preview series. It looks like you changed a couple things up here. You found a little tweak to what you were searching for.
Yeah, well, thanks to some people in the Discord, like there was a sanity check on the and you did it in real time too. But Yordan Alvarez being at the top of the other one was obviously some weird trick of the query that didn't make sense. And what it was I clicked that they had to be in the outfield. So I think he just didn't play that much in the outfield, and maybe when he did play in the outfield, it was mostly against righties. I don't know. Maybe that was just what happened, because when I took the outfield click off and I just said, give me percentage of left on left over all pitches for the season, and then the list really came into focus of all the players that you are worried about. And I also have a rule of thumb for you. We're going to put this this query in the show notes, and I think around 15% is where you are risk of being platoon. And what I've shown here is 12% and below, and these guys are established, I think, stuck in a platoon and never getting out. And in it is Kerry Carpenter, in it is Lamont Wade Jr., in it is Mickey Moniak, in it is Oswaldo Cabrera. There's some interesting. Jake Fraley and Josh Lowe. So Josh Lowe is at 12%, is like the lowest that I've shown. But if you are 15% or lower, you're in the top quartile for being platooned. And so 15% is a good number to sort of remember. I think Josh Lowe's at 12%. So I think maybe he's just in a platoon, and that's who he is. So this reduces my desire to take you a little bit. This because of keeper leagues, and also even in the sort of Jock Peterson daily league situation where you may get in the game, but you might lose that last plate appearance. That's just another chance to hit a homer. So all these guys are downgraded except for one, because I love him, and he's going to come in my hard hit comps later.
Yeah, do you want to do the hard hit comps now? Because I feel like that's a perfect transition. Like, when and why would you push back on this list? I think you've got a pretty good example.
Well, yeah, Trevor Larnach has not been playing in the big leagues that long, but when he has shown us a strikeout rate, a barrel rate, and a hard hit rate that produces these comps. It's pretty nasty. Juan Soto, Yordan Alvarez, Fernando Tatis Jr., Kyle Tucker, Anthony Santander, Randall Grichuk, I guess, Trevor Larnach, Jackson Merrill, Lars Nootbaar, Michael Harris, Brian Reynolds, Wyatt Langford, and Jarren Duran.
No, Jarren
Duran. Anyway, the group hit 274 with a 220 ISO, and had a 135 WRC plus as a group. And I love him. I think that Larnach might be stuck in a platoon, but he's cheap. And he goes among other platoon guys. And I think that the Twins at some point could decide, crap, he's actually one of our best hitters. And so we can't platoon everywhere. They might want to platoon Matt Wallner. They have to have a guy who can replace Byron Buxton in center field, for whatever reason. So their bench is kind of hard to put together. And at some point, if you're doing the rule of five, Larnach might end up in the top of the rule of five.
Yeah, what I've been wondering for a while now is just how effectively Larnach and Wallner can be on the same roster. They have a lot of similarities.
Yeah, but Larnach makes more contact, which matters. I mean, it's a better batting average, better OBP, most likely.
I'd like to see them both in the lineup. I think you just find a way to kind of put a couple guys around them that have different approaches, that are maybe lower K rate players, and then you can at least present opposing pitchers with a couple of wrinkles.
Yeah, I think Brooks Lee and Willie Castro are kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that could work.
Those are different guys that you can put around them. I mean, Willie, they do strike out a little bit more than you'd want. It'd be great if they had like 14% strikeout rates, but they are different players.
And the Twins, ever since they made that deal with Carlos Correa, I know Aaron Gleeman wrote about this for The Athletic.
Oh, God,
they have been
depressing.
So quiet for couple of years now. They make moves, small trades, different things they've done are just it's always very cash neutral. You look at that depth chart, whatever grade we put on a depth chart in January in terms of its like stickiness or permanence, they'd be at the higher end of that's probably about what you get. Like I would more confidently use ink to write their depth chart than I would a lot of other teams, just based on how they've behaved in the better part of 2 years now.
Yeah, and that piece was really damning in terms of he added up like all of the money that they've acquired in trades and in free agency, and it was like $7 million. Like over the last 3 years. So, I agree with you. It's whatever they do next is not going to be a big one unless they harangue that Cease trade. And I think, actually, if I was the Padres and came calling, I might want one of Larnach or Wallner in the Cease trade.
Right.
Because
pull
they have
something
a really
like
bad
that
outfield situation. But that's still trading into good playing time, probably.
I wouldn't worry about the playing time situation. Maybe it helps them both because it sort of protects Larnach and Wallner by putting them on different depth charts where they're desperately needed for what they can bring. I think part of that rumor or report or idea, I forget which bucket that actually falls into, but it made a lot of sense, was, yes, they get Dylan Cease, but they also move Christian Vasquez back as part of let's make it cash neutral to give the Padres a better option behind the plate. That's, very relatively speaking.
Yeah, you can pretty easily put this deal together. It seems like Cease is $13 million, Vasquez is $10 million. Prospects, maybe they pay a little bit more of Vasquez's deal or something to get fewer prospects, or maybe they don't. Maybe they just get Cease instead of Vasquez, and it costs them probably one of their pitchers too, along with Larnach, because it is Cease. He's good.
Should we go I'll name a name and you just kind of give me a sure, no thanks on these guys?
Well, let's do the bat speed one real quick.
The bat speed.
I didn't give you a picture for that, did I?
You didn't. So you got to describe it.
Okay, so this one's just easy. Go to StatCast, go to the bat tracking leaderboard, reduce the amount of total swings. I did 100. And you get Stanton, Cruz, John Kenzie, Noel, Kyle Schwarber, Jordan Walker 5, Matt Wallner 6, Junior Caminero 7, Aaron Judge 8, Gerard Encarnacion 9. And that's an interesting way to find guys that do have top end power potential. Garrett Mitchell, 22nd in bat speed. Joe Adell, 11th. Matt Chapman, even in his decline phase, 12th. So this is I think a great place to look for power flyers, and so Noel and Encarnacion, who could add first base eligibility for the Giants. I mean, the Giants' first base situation right now is Lamont Wade Jr., who was on the always platooned list. Mm-hmm. Wilmer Flores, who I really like him as a person, but I think there's always a DFA chance in the last year of a deal at his age. And then Encarnacion, who's also third on the DH list, which is Wilmer Flores, Elliot Ramos, who has defensive value, and you might want to just still play him out there, and then Gerard third. So he's third on two of the most jankiest depth chart situations on an okay team in baseball.
I didn't know that Garrett Mitchell was on this list. I had not previously looked at this leaderboard, so that's a pleasant surprise that sort of tacks on to part 3 of our outfield series, looking at how Garrett Mitchell stacks up to some of the other guys going around him. That's encouraging. I also find it extra weird that Trey Cabbage was top 20 in bat speed, and the Pirates decided to just take some money and let him go pursue an overseas opportunity when he may have actually been a good option.
They're like, we kind of have Jack Sawinski already. And I think, I don't know, I saw some similarities in Sawinski and Cabbage.
Well, they also got Billy Cook, too.
You got to let Billy cook. I did poke around and there was an interaction between the Pirates and the team. There isn't always, like when you see a quick turnaround like that on waiver claim and then the player goes to Japan or whatever, that suggests that probably there was some sort of communication going on, like, hey, can you pick that player for us, basically, and we'll have some sort of back and forth. If there's a guy who's a free agent who's sitting there, like if Ty France signs in Japan now, that sort of situation, there's no interaction. If he gets released and then there's like 3 weeks later he signs in Japan, that's a different situation.
I wonder how many players that have a last name that is shared with a country could sign in other countries. That'd be great. Domingo Germán would
France
count.
Signs in Japan.
Hi, France. Yeah. I gotta think more about that.
The Milwaukee outfield situation is interesting because Blake Perkins also showed up on the elite glove list.
Yeah, Blake Perkins is a great defender, man.
Yeah, so you have in Milwaukee like the sort of like they have these roles. Like Blake Perkins is the elite glove guy, Garrett Mitchell is the upside guy, Frelick is the contact guy, and Churio's the stud who's in there all the time. So I'm not exactly sure how they appropriate playing time between Mitchell, Perkins, and Frelick, though.
But they've talked about Frelick playing third, which they haven't necessarily filled because you're moving Joey Ortiz to short, most likely. So if they do that, that creates another spot in the corner mix where maybe Tyler Black's glove plays better, right? Maybe he's an option in left field instead of first base. So there's like one other little path for Tyler Black just to work him back into this conversation.
I mean, the basic problem in Milwaukee is third base, and that can be solved in any number of ways that creates opportunities. This is basically what you're saying. That's another way of saying it. I mean, because it could be Durbin at second, Turang at short, Ortiz at third, right? It could be Tyler Black at second, could be Tyler Black at right, Sal Frelick at third. I mean, I think that's why they haven't made a big move to cover it. Is like we have a lot of different ways that we can cover it.
Right. If the right thing comes along, a discounted free agent trade opportunity, then they'll make that move. If they don't, then they'll just shift pieces around and kind of see what happens. Maybe make that trade in season. They're pretty active as far as moves they make during the year. If you look back at what they've done, even going back to the Stearns era. The other outfielders in this group, Heston Kjerstad kind of stands out to me as another, hey, we've been waiting. When is the opportunity coming? Projections for Heston Kjerstad are still good. They 108 WRC plus or better, looking at the sets over at Fangraphs right now, as high as 115 from ATC. Another guy that you look at and say, I'm not sure he's got a whole lot left to prove at AAA because he's spent 132 games there now, and he's been great at that level.
It's a depth chart problem. I mean, Oopsie has him as the 10th best WRC plus projected, behind Kobe Mayo, but most importantly, well behind Ryan Mountcastle and Ryan O'Hearn. It's an embarrassment of riches, really, is how I would see it. And I think he might be headed towards, it's not the Kyle Stowers future, but it is in that, he's going to bounce up and around until he's a little bit older than, people think. I mean, he already is 25. And either Ryan O'Hearn goes kaput and he just kind of slides into that role, or, Kjerstad is the guy who goes in a trade.
Yeah. I'm still kind of interested, though. I think there's been enough good in the limited samples, and being that Kjerstad is a lefty, even if it ends up being a big side platoon with the Orioles, I think that could be fine for as late as he goes in a lot of situations.
It's a little bit weird, though. The combination of swing strike rate and max EVs, it haven't been that good in the last 2 years. Max EVs under 110. Hard hit rates look okay. The hard hit rates are actually pretty good, but the swing strike rates have been sort of 13 to 15% over the last 2 years for him. So I don't think he's going to have a necessary plus batting average. He could have a decent OBP, and maybe he's a guy who gets to his power more than has like amazing raw power.
Right. Maybe it's more like 25 to 30 home run power at his peak with 260 sort of averages. Good player, not a superstar, but pretty good for this late in the draft if it were to happen here in 2025. You mentioned Jean-Kenzie Noel already. Really like what he brings to the table. They need power there. Max Kepler in Philly. You've liked Max Kepler for a while. How do you like the fit there?
I think the ballpark is going to help him a lot. And in daily leagues, I think he will be platooned pretty hard because they've got Marsh and Rojas. They have the ability to platoon. And one thing you noticed, one thing that I came away with when I did that lefty versus lefty thing, I handpicked the names out that were not outfielders, just because we're doing an outfielder show, and I only picked like one or two guys out. Like I took Jock Pederson and somebody else out, like it was really like all outfielders. So at this point, you're like judging Max Kepler against other platoon outfielders. And if you do that, you're like, oh, well, he does not strike out much. He's going to a new park that's going to help his power. He's always been like a pull fly ball guy. Like it could really work out to where he gets you 20 homers and a 250 average in 2/3 of playing time.
Is there a reason to be excited about Jordan Beck? I mean, we talked about Chris Bryant, and even though things are, him up. I think there's something here, man. Like the K rates were not that bad at AAA last year, which
23.
It's a little wonky, as we know, with the ABS there. He's shown some lower level K rates that aren't that bad. He takes his walks. He's got power. He's got speed. Underlying power supported by a 46% hard hit rate last year in the minors. It goes like a quarter season. But man, if your obstacle to playing every day is Sam Hilliard and or Chris Bryant, and there's another spot where those guys could also play, if you're the Rockies, how do you not give that time to Jordan Beck?
It's kind of fun too that he is a right-hander, because I feel like a right-hander with three options, the choice is that he will either be in the big leagues playing most of the time or he'll be in the minors. It's not likely that he'll end up in a platoon role on the major leagues. Small side platoon at 23 years old with options? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think there's a shot at a regular role, and it could pay off because there's a lot of ways Jordan Beck can contribute in roto leagues. How about Colby Thomas with the A's? Like, how do you see the playing time shaking out with their outfield options?
Well, that left field situation in Oakland is bad. Right now, it's they say it's Andujar and Seth Brown, and Seth Brown is 32. And has been below league average with the stick the last 2 years. In fact, he's been below replacement overall. Like I don't think Seth Brown is making it to opening day as the starter there. And Andujar has been claimed and released by a lot of places. So this is a really soft situation, which I think, the Oakland's like, we're not worried about it because, maybe Asturi Ruiz looks great and we can push him Blade to left and solved, or maybe Andujar, does find the fountain of youth, or maybe Colby Thomas steps forward and takes the job. 24 years old, does strike out too much, but does everything else pretty well. And had a pretty amazing season by sort of raw results last year. 277 with 31 homers and 15 stolen bases and 575 plate appearances. I mean, one thing you can tell right away is that he played enough that he can play a full season in the major leagues. That's sometimes a question with guys coming up through the minors. But he's played nearly a 600 plate appearance season. Had a 131 WRC plus. That was a little bit lower in AAA, 117 in AAA. I think it would be a low batting average. It'd be Seth Brownish, but younger with more speed, more defensive ability, and more upside to be better than Seth Brown.
Yeah, I think Colby Thomas could be exciting. I like the fit there, given the lack of established options atop that depth chart. And Duhar, aside from being released multiple times or waived multiple times, health concerns, like major time lost to injuries over the years as well. You've talked about the Marlins. I think Kyle Stowers kind of stands out as a very late option that could end up playing a lot. I mean, they may play him in center field. I actually see the Marlins treating Stowers similar to the way that the A's treat JJ Bleday, where they just say, hey, maybe you're not a center fielder in the eyes of a lot of other clubs. You can be a center fielder here, and you can play every day.
That gives us another option to try somebody in left field like Griffin Conine or Derek Hill or any of these guys that we're kind of cycling through right now. Sometimes it makes sense just to take your guy that you want to see the most of and just stick him at a defensive position so that you kind of make it easy on the manager. You know what I mean? Okay, Stowers is our center fielder, and we're rotating through right fielders. Just remember it that way,
Yeah, and I don't think he's going to be bad out there. I think the expectation was that he'd be better in the corner than in center, right? Because he's more of like an average runner, and the scouting reports had him as maybe a future 55 field. It's not ridiculous to put him in center field. It just seemed like he was more likely to be corner in the long run. But sometimes those guys end up being okay in center for a little while. And Stowers isn't young. He just turned 27 in January. So I think they'd really want to see what they have. Just give him a full run.
I don't know if his quality of contact is good enough to support the swing strike and the strikeout rates he has. So far it hasn't been. A 10% barrel rate is fine, but a 10% barrel rate is like, oh, I want you to be striking out 25% of the time. You know what I mean? A 10% barrel rate with a 33.8% strikeout rate is barely working.
I think it's going to work out all right for Stowers in the short term, given the situation in Miami. I mean, 56.5% hard hit rate at AAA in 2023. He was up at 44% last year. Even in the big leagues, 51.3% hard hit rates with a K rate like that it's good enough to have a high K rate. It's probably not good enough to have a 35, but projections all have him down like around 30% with the K rate. He walks enough to be okay in OBP. I think that plays in Miami, given the current state. I mean, they're hitting a hard reset on that roster right now. So the bar is pretty low to get a significant share of playing time for the Marlins in 2025. I think Kyle Stowers can clear it. Anybody else here near the bottom?
I don't know. Alex Verdugo we were looking at free agent lists, and he's basically the only left-hander that could sign into a starting role that's left on the market. We have some right-handers that could steal people's jobs in the small side, like Jason Hayward, but there isn't really a free agent out there that's projected to be league average that's going to steal somebody's job anymore. Outfield is all dried up basically, which makes it better for like somebody like Luke Raley. Like, you know, maybe a trade will change their situation, but I think his playing time is good, and he's an elite power speed guy that people just don't know about, you know. And if you could have him in a league where he's a backup and you play him when you need to, and maybe you play him away from home where he doesn't strike out as much, you know, and you don't play him when he's playing facing a lot of lefties, I think Luke Raley can definitely help you. In the same way, Dylan Moore is eligible everywhere, you know, and so if you just want to have somebody in your deeper league that's like on your bench that can paper over a short-term problem somewhere, I still like Dylan Moore. I look at the depth chart in New York, and I think Jeff McNeil will at least start the season as the starter. I'm not as sold as on Luis Angel Acuna as maybe some people are. And Jeff McNeil's a really boring option there. And I think that they might start with boring, and if they have problems, shake it up and do the young guys.
It's actually appropriate to talk about Billy Cook for a minute before we go. I know it's been a running joke.
Yeah.
It's been a running joke. I don't know how he appeared in several infield previews exactly. I'll never understand what really happened to make that possible. But if most of our conversations about the Pirates are they don't have their established five, the rule of five, the five guys that are going to play every day and you mix and match everywhere else, we really don't know who their five are right now. Billy Cook split last year between two organizations and even had some time at Double-A. Most of the season he played at Triple-A. Started the year with the Orioles, finished the year with the Pirates. 430 plate appearances at Triple-A, 16 homers, 21 steals. He was caught 6 times. Little bit more swing and miss after the trade with the Pirates, but has flashed occasionally the ability to have a manageable K rate. I'm referring to 2023 at Double-A. Spent the whole year at that level, 25% K rate. Little old for the level.
Even last year, the combined was 23.5.
Yeah, so old for the level. Concerns about the quality of minor league pitching kind of baked in these last couple of years. I get it. He's actually been above average at every stop other than high A in 2022. He's been good despite the strikeout rate. Has a lot of ways to help us, man.
He's a bit old, so you'd be revising that WRC plus downward.
You'd be chipping away at it. But where was he going to go in Baltimore in that rebuild? Like a very blocked sort of player too, right? Like priority-wise wasn't going to take spots from a lot of the more highly regarded prospects. I think stranger things have happened, man. I think the Billy Cook randomness, it could actually work for him in Pittsburgh. He could be a useful, very deep league fantasy player.
Yeah, I still have some love for Jack Sawinski because, he does have good bat speed. He has, showed great barrel rates, and he improved his strikeout rate a little bit last year. And I could see him sort of putting it together at 26. But, a Jack Sawinski, Jorge Palacios, Joshua Palacios, who's 29 and projected to be below league average with the bat and doesn't really have a standout skill other than maybe contact. I think that's a pretty soft portion of the depth chart. So, Reynolds and O'Neill Cruz are ensconced, but right field is open for business.
Are you ready to be hurt by Jack Sowinski again?
I've taken him as my last outfielder in drafting holds. And, I did want to point out that something that's kind of cool about the end of this list, there are some guys here who are infield, outfield eligible, and I love taking those guys late because I need to cover like two positions. Ezekiel Duran, I think, will play. I mean, we don't know exactly what Evan Carter is going to do with the in terms of platooning in Texas. But he's a platoon candidate. Duran last year played 285 plate appearances. The year before, 439. Jung is, hurt a lot. Young is hurt a lot at third. They have different places where Duran just shows up and you're like, oh, thank God we have this guy who's, cromulent and can play at a position where we just had a major injury. So, and they just got Jock Pederson, who is only versus righty pitchers as the DH. So Duran could be the platoon at DH. So I think he'll make the team. He's pasted over for a lot of their positions, and he is third base and outfield eligible. Connor Joe does that, but he doesn't have a job right now. Mark Canha does that with first base and outfield, but he doesn't have a job. So, among those three, when you're looking at late infield outfield options, I think Duran is underrated.
Perhaps some February signings, so free agent additions for a few teams rounding out their rosters among the names that you just mentioned there. But yeah, I do look for the guys that qualify at multiple spots at the very, very end. A lot of times you can get a corner with the outfield or middle with the outfield. That adds a little bit to that last spot or two on your roster.
I also did something really weird in one league, just real quick. I had, let's see, who was it? Myers, McCormick, and Melton as my 5 through 8 outfield, or 6 through 8 outfielders.
So you're pretty actively against the Alex Bregman reunion that would push Jose Altuve into an outfield spot.
I was nervous about Profar signing with them, but I actually think, looking at their finances, that they are tapped out. I'm betting against Bregman, and I bet against Profar. So far, so good. But it also gives you that idea that sometimes you can platoon or like sort of handcuff outfield situations and buy twice into an outfield when it makes sense in a draft and hold like that.
Buy 3, get 2. Buy 2, at least get 1. That's the goal, at least. Just kind of cover that spot and make sure you get someone playing every day available. Or if you just don't know which guy's going to be better in some cases because they're very similar in terms of what they bring to the table, there's one way around it in these deep leagues that have the 50 roster spots. We are going to go on our way out the door. A reminder, you can join our Discord with the link in the show description. Inside the Discord, you can find the links to all of the Hive Mind rankings we've done so far, including the UT only, which just went up today. Pitcher Week begins on Tuesday.
Yeah, baby. Thanks for listening.